Good afternoon and welcome to this very special hour where we get to discuss the power of audio, the power of radio, a medium that continues to set moods, to heal hearts, to elevate and to delight around the world. My name is Grant Nash and I am honored to moderate today's discussion. So before we begin anything, I want to play you one of my favorite pieces of radio. Now, here's the deal. It's in Spanish. I apologize, but it's got little subtitles, which kind of defeats the object of audio, but just bear with me here. Okay, so one of my favorite pieces of radio, and if you've never heard it before, you're going to enjoy this. If you have, then sit back and enjoy it again. Here we go.
Hello, buenas.
Sí, buena, Brea.
¿Quién anda ahí?
Arturo Merán.
Arturo, ¿de dónde, brother?
Estamos aquí de Salcedo.
De Salcedo. Saludos para toda mi gente de Salcedo, la gente buena del Cibao. Brother, cuéntamelo todo, saluda a tu gente.
No, yo lo que quiero es pedir a ver si tú me pones una canción.
Claro que sí, mi brother, la que tú digas.
Sí, yo quiero que tú me pongas la canción que dice, ¿esos son Reebok o son Nike?
¿Esos son Reebok o son Nike?
Sí.
Pero, ¿cómo se llama?
¿Son Reebok o son Nike?
¿Esos son Reebok o son Nike?
A ver, compláceme, que me gusta mucho esa canción. Está muy pegada esa canción.
¿Esos son Reebok o son Nike? ¿Será esta, brother? ¿Será esta?
Esa misma, Brea, esa misma es.
Cuídate, mi hermano. Hay que complacerlo.
So it's a classic piece, right? And if you've never heard it before, it always puts a smile on my face. And one of the reasons why I love it so much is because it's so human, right? It's so human. It's also so in the moment. It's happening right now. And for me, it just epitomizes so much of this medium I absolutely love. Radio at its core being so personal. It's you and the music. It's you and the presenter. And radio is there from the moment we wake up to the seconds before a business pitch. Radio is always with us. Radio sets our mood in our life. It heals some of our heartbreak. It elevates debate. And all of us, let's be honest, have a favorite memory associated with radio, be it a prank, be it this little silly piece that I played you now, which was just a phone call, be it a life-changing moment you remember where listeners came together and changed someone's life, be it news that you heard for the very first time on radio, or the way you connected with your community slightly differently. We all have that memory about radio. And let's be honest, brands have thrived using the medium for years and years and years. Why? Because people interact with radio. People have recall when it comes to radio, and people continuously use the radio every day. The reality is the power of this medium, the power of spoken word, it can't be summed up in a few sentences like I've tried. It's so much more. And today, thank you for joining us as we try to unpack what it is about this power of the medium and how to use it most effectively for your brands. So thank you for joining the NAB for Radio Always and partnering, of course, with Redzone. Thank you guys so much as we unpack this ever-evolving world that is radio. It's a critical component of the 21st century media mix. Are we in the 21st century? I think we're beyond that, right? Aren't we? Anyway, it's a critical component, right? And we're gonna share some ideas today. Now, I'm gonna introduce you to our rock star panel, and genuinely a rock star panel we have today. I am honored to be on the same call with them, and I'm delighted to introduce you to them. So let's start with the managing director of the media shop. That's right, we went for the managing director here. We went all the way to the top. Thank you, Dashni Vilakazi, for joining us today. It's an honor to have you on the call, Fred.
Thank you very much for that.
Awesome. Then, like I said, we going to the top, and we've just gone and got, you know, one of the top creative directors in our country. He works at the very well-known Joe Public. We're talking about Tsepo. Tumachole, thank you so much for joining us. I know you are super busy, and we're delighted to have you on the call today. Thank you, friend.
Thank you for having me.
Then a man that needs no introduction. I actually learned of his second name today, but I'm not gonna reveal that. Don't worry. He is the Chief Marketing Officer of Nando's Africa, Middle East, and South Asia. Doug Place, thank you so much for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. And I'm surrounded by rock stars. It's somewhat intimidating. Let's see how we go.
Brilliant. And then we're going to end with our last rock star, a research and analytical rock star, someone that I've had the privilege of working with for many years. And I'm going to put her on the spot in a moment. We're going to see how well she does. She's currently the research and analytical manager at Kagiso Media. Melissa McNally, so good to see you. Thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Lovely to be here again, Grant. Thank you.
So Mel, while your mic is on, friend, I'm just going to put you on the spot, right? I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Of course, again.
This week, right now, how many South Africans are going to tune into their favorite radio station? And let's talk adults, right? 15 plus. How many of them are going to tune into their favorite radio station this week?
So, Grant, on average, it's going to be about 8 out of 10 adult South Africans listening to the radio on a weekly basis in South Africa right now.
Right, 8 out of 10. So when we speak reach, and I wanted to start there and get it out of the way for a moment, because we're going to speak creativity, we're going to speak planning, but let's be honest. We still live in a world where we speak reach, right? We still speak reach. People want to speak about reach. Radio does a pretty good job at reaching South Africans, right?
Well, certainly, given those numbers, if we have a look at them from a reach perspective, I mean, gives us a reach across metropolitan, also peri-urban kind of areas, and then into rural. So if we look at that specifically, we are reaching South Africans across the various SEM groupings as well. So yeah, adding to that, providing diversity in that space.
Beautiful. So Mel, I'm going to come back to you a little bit later, and I'm actually going to jump straight to Darshni, and then I'm going to go around the room with the same question. And I'm actually just going to start hardcore here, right? I'm going to go with a difficult question. So Darshni, you're sitting in front of a bunch of marketers, a bunch of brands, and they ask you the following question. They say, Darsh, how do I use radio correctly? Is there like a silver bullet when it comes to using radio effectively? Can you help us out, Darshni?
So radio, with regards to the science of numbers, reach definitely stands out, but I think the frequency is also very key. And when you look at radio, you're playing with, the myriad of different numbers like geo-targeting and footprint, audience, but the power of radio has really been the contextual edge at which radio comes in, because it's the medium that is reaching a consumer closer to that purchase decision. And the power of radio has always been a very persuasive, the persuasive strength that it's had, and the creds and the trust that radio brings into play is very powerful. And radio, especially, is probably one of the mediums that stood out, where the attribution factor of radio. So when you're paying 1 + 1 is equal to 3 with radio, because of the fact that there has been so many studies done that radio has its attributional power. And I'll talk a little bit more about that study later on, but it's really just to show that every time a radio ad was played in the study, that the brands in that study saw an immediate uplift on Google search.
Right. So, I mean, I love that, right? So already we're speaking attribution, we're speaking trust. I'm going to go to the creative in the room to maybe change the tune a little bit. Tsepo, I'm going to go straight to you. I'm going to ask you the same question, right? So again, you're sitting with brands. How do they utilize radio correctly in your space, in your thinking?
Sure. So So speaking from a creative point of view, I mean, radio with us obviously starts with the script, before we even get into the studio to record the voiceover. So it starts with the idea. And for me, usually how I look at radio is that, yes, we know we're reaching a lot of people, but when that brief comes to the table, I'm thinking about that one person who's going to be listening to it. And that's where it becomes personal, from the creative side of things as well. You're writing for that one person who needs to get that joke that you're trying to land, who needs to get that message that the brand is trying to communicate. And that's how I approach it from a creative point of view. And it taps into that whole persuasive nature that has just been spoken about. How do I persuade that one consumer that I'm talking to? As much as I'm reaching millions of South Africans, but that one person, how do I convert them? How do I convince them that this is the right product for them, this is the right brand for them? And I think from a standout point of view, like, brands need to always look at that, because you're having conversations. I look at radio as more of a conversation that I'm having with that listener. So if 4 people are having conversations with you, I need to be the one that stands out. And from a creative point of view, that's the challenge that we have. How do I make sure that when all these people are trying to communicate the same thing, how do I stand out from a creative point of view? And that's where brands come in, and that's where brands also challenge us to stand out as well in our creative thinking.
I love what you said. What's so interesting for me, Tsepo, is that radio seems to be the last very personal medium. And let me sort of clarify that, right? I don't know if you've seen influencers speaking on a social media, for example. Have you noticed that they will always use the collective when they speak to their followers, right? So they always go, hi guys, hi, whatever they call them, right? And then they also give them names, right? So they their followers get names. And then it's always a collective group, which is really interesting, because from a social media perspective, I sometimes feel like I am consuming it on my own. However, I feel like I'm always consuming it in a group, where radio is always the personal medium. Radio is always spoken to one individual, at one person, listening and having that personal experience, which is really fascinating. And you've just spoken about that as being an incredible strength that we still have. And thank you for that. Doug, I'm going to go to you and ask the same question, right? So in your case, not much persuading needed, because you're the guy that makes the decisions, but I'm going to put you in a room of other brands, right? So I'm going to ask you the same question, right? Is there a silver bullet? How can they use radio correctly? Is there a correct way of using this medium?
Yeah, sure. There's no one way. There's a lot of ways to do it well, and there are even more ways to do it badly. If there was one way and one silver bullet, believe me, I wouldn't have a job. Most of us wouldn't. You'd have the AI bots planning media strategy, and as many marketing conferences are to be believed, which I don't, is the future is big data and the internet, and antiquated mediums like radio and outdoor and TV are going to relics of the past, and that still was nonsense, frankly. I think the most important thing, as we said currently, is that the credibility of radio in particular is significant. In fact, the credibility of things like social media are increasingly under, and for good reason, pressure. Young people have learned not to trust everything you read on the internet, and the fake news associated with all things COVID-19, and you don't have those inherent limitations within radio. I think some of the best radio work, and we can get to that a little bit later in the conversation, is work that embraces the inherent limitations of the media. So it's quite tempting, for the reasons we've just discussed, to say radio gives you plenty of options and mass reach, and it gives you, a huge amount of dexterity within a broader media mix, as my boss Dashni here would say. She spends most of Nando's money. Actually, yes, she does spend the most Nando's money. But I think from a creative perspective, it's those people that there are limitations of radio. It's quite hard to capture people's imagination if it's just sitting in the background, or it's while you're driving. So, creative rock stars like Tsepo, he's being very humble. I hope you push his buttons a little bit more. This is a radio star genius on the rise here. Are those who can embrace the limitations of the media and then really make it work for it. So, it doesn't sell, radio, I'll be honest, doesn't sell a lot of Nando's quarter chicken meals because you can't see it. That's the whole limitation of the media. But when you can use it, in other contexts, in fact, the very first Nando's ads were on radio. They were, you know, at the time before it became cliche to sort of do impersonations of Mandela, before Jerry Mansfield made the thing. We had a comedian called Billy King, who did a brilliant, you know, Mandela interpretation. So we had these commercials talking about, you know, the left wing or the right wing, and both wings are, you know, available at Nando's. And that's how this brand, which is 35 years old in 24 countries around the world, was born. It was born on a radio station. So it's as important now as it is then, even though you know, the way in which the brand is received by younger people, you know, is more varied than perhaps it was 20, 30, 35 years ago.
Yeah, I love it. And there's so much to unpack there. And we're definitely going to have to come back to you often, because I have a lot of questions on that. So we're going to come back to that. Mel, I'm not going to forget you, right? You're in front of a room, friend. You're gonna have to tell them how to use this thing correctly. What do you say?
So Grant, you know, obviously speaking more from a research and analytics perspective, we sit with this data every day. We sit with a lot of copy as well. I have in the past, specifically. What we do tend to see is a lot of wastage when people actually just go for pure reach in this space because they're not targeted enough specifically, or they're merely looking at frequency with very little understanding of the entire product cycle. So when I speak of this, we often see people going in for a burst for a vehicle advert, but they're not taking into consideration the full or complete product cycle for that actual purchase, which is really interesting to look at, because then the ROI is perceived to be low during that time because of lead gen or whatever it might be. But we're not actually looking at, we actually needed 6 months to a year, or where people would be in that product cycle for that audience specifically. So it's really interesting to look at those kind of elements over and above that. And yeah, it's about combining your BRC or your RAMs or whatever data you have available alongside your own audience research to make the best decisions in that space over and above that. And then obviously leveraging your entire ecosystem effectively, because we have an entire audio ecosystem over and above just terrestrial radio that we need to start looking at going forward and into the future. So, and then creative always tends to be plugged on last in my world. I always feel that it is plugged on last for radio. Or we take a whole bucket of spots and we just throw in generics and hope to achieve the best results. So I really think that we need to start looking at creative for radio with a lot more importance in the actual mix of what we do with the medium. So that would generally be my main take-up from what I've seen over the last couple of years. The relevance of the actual advert, not applying the same advert across various stations. We often see that, and then it's got no relevance to a specific audience. So that's why I spoke about actually understanding your audiences that you actually work with over and above that, because one audience on another radio station is certainly not the same on another. And that particular voice or character may not actually appeal to them and have relevance in terms of the engagement that we're trying to create. So there are various aspects. So Grant, I know we've been down this road many times with the creative. So I'm not going to harp on about it too much, but to that point, I do feel that creative comes in at the butt end of all our consideration factors for radio.
So because of my history and because of where I come from, I'm going to bring it right in. I'm going to bring it in the beginning, right? And then we're going to come back and speak numbers and. You know, one of the things that I think is so important about our medium is that our medium is a medium of storytellers. It's a medium that belongs in my head at the time when we used to sit around the fire and we used to tell stories. We used to tell stories because it was audio, it was storytelling. And this is what we do. This is the strength of what we do. We storytellers. So, Tsepo, like, how do we even begin? I mean, I'm selling paint, for goodness sake, right? I'm selling, I don't know, I'm selling a pen. Like, and now you're telling me that the strength is in the story. And I'm going, geez, man, like, how am I going to shape creative storytelling and messaging for radio? It's a complex question, but can you break it down in a few steps, right? If I'm new to the audio medium, if I want to spend some money on the audio medium, how do we shape creative messaging for radio? Is there sort of a few pointers you can give us that help us to shape that storytelling and that messaging for radio?
Sure. And just to touch on Melissa's point, she said something quite significant around targeting and catering your message to a particular audience. And I think that's the first stage of the creative process. Who am I talking to? What am I trying to tell them? You know, before I use a story to just try and reach everybody, what am I trying to say to people? So for me, I always tell people that you can sell anything and make it sound fun. I mean, we've made socks sound fun. We've won gold awards to make socks and vests sound fun, you know. And for me, that's what I always tell people who ask me, like, the genius of radio is how you tell your story, how you unpack that story to people, and that comes down to insight and knowing your audience. So knowing what the audience leans more towards, knowing what your audience really gravitates more towards, having those, and I know insight is quite a buzzword within our industry. It's been something that we've been throwing around for a while now, but people's experiences will always come to the fore when you're telling their stories, you know, and that's the thing I always tell people. You can't tell people's stories on their behalf. You need to know the people you're talking about, and you need to tell the stories the way they experience it. And for you to experience those stories is by immersing yourself into your audience and knowing your audience and knowing who you're really trying to target. So whether or not you're selling a pen or a glass or whatever, if you know your audience and if you know how your audience experience certain products and how they experience life, then it's easy for you to relay a story to them that they will understand in a way that they will understand and hopefully convert them into consumers of your product.
So I mean, Tebo, it's such an interesting thing that you're speaking about, right? Because if you switch on the radio today, switch on any FM radio station, switch on a commercial FM radio station, go and listen to the spot set, right? So go listen to 6 or 7 spot sets, depending on what station you're listening to. I mean, most of them are trying to sell you price and product. They're trying to get out every single attribute of the product. They just chuck it down your throat. They have 30 seconds. They're going to give you the price at the end. And then they're going to turn around and they're going to say, oh man, this radio thing doesn't work. This radio thing doesn't work. I mean, I've chucked $1 million at it. I've chucked a bunch of these. This thing doesn't work. I'm going to go somewhere else, right? And maybe that thing that you're trying to do, maybe that works somewhere else. But why is it that we haven't evolved as, and specifically in my head, I don't know if it's true, but in my head, it's mainly from a brand and an advertising perspective, not so much from the actual media owners themselves, where we get this kind of advertising coming on radio over and over again. Because everything you've just said is almost the antithesis to that type of advertising. However, the majority of adverts on radio are that. Why do you think we've ended up here, and how do you think we move away from that?
Sure. So I think, I mean, firstly, we need to be honest with each other that we need to sell. You know, when a brand comes to an agency, the main priority is for us to move the product. But I think that's where the relationship between the agency and the brand comes in. That's where the trust comes in. That's where the media agencies are also involved. And we try to find the best way to make sure that our product stands out. And it comes down to that, to be honest. You know, I mean, as a brand manager or a CMO of a brand, if I tell you that, you know what, let's not have a radio ad, let's write a song instead. You know what I mean? You're gonna look at me like I'm crazy. You know, and that's where the trust comes in, and that's where the relationship that you build as an agency with your brand, with your consumers, knowing your consumers, and the trust between your media agencies as well, and talking to them and asking them, how do we best execute this? Is a 30-second spot really going to work? What if I come up with a song? You know, what if I do something different? And that's where you get to stand out. But then that relationship is built in time, you know, and that's why from a creative point of view as well, we always need to challenge the medium. You know, radio has been, you know, I love the radio medium because it's not shy about what it is and the limitations thereof. And it's up to us, how do we creatively work within those boundaries? And I think that's what Doug touched on as well. How do you work within those boundaries and make them work in your favor? So for me, I think for us to really achieve standout work, it's starting with trust between brands and agencies and working together using the medium that we all love and that we all know that has so much potential to achieve whatever objectives that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and maybe I should just jump straight into you there, Doug, because you guys have never been afraid. I think there isn't a brand in the country that epitomizes what Tsepo is speaking about there, right? Is a brand that wants to tap into that wants to tell stories, that wants to tap into the zeitgeist of what's going on. I mean, I must tell you all a story. So when I was, my last sort of radio space was at Prime Media, and I get a brief, and Doug's trying to, I don't know, I mean, we're trying to sell the news, and we're trying to pop a story at the end of the news bulletin. And it's just, it's super creative. It's different. He's, just your team coming up with things. Dash is fighting because I have to put it on the schedule somehow, and that's causing me problems because, right, and I just remember this, but it is almost exactly what you're speaking about, Tsepo. Nando's never been afraid to do that. And Doug, I mean, that's not easy though, right? That's it. There's a lot of moving parts there to try to figure out how we do this kind of stuff. It's not the easy route, right?
Yeah, sure. And thank you. That's very flattering. I hope my boss is too good. I think all advertising, and it's not just the remit of Nando's, should inherently be worth listening to. And for most people, their consumption of advertising is, as you say, it's intrusive and boring normally, as opposed to welcomed and persuasive. And that's not limited to radio by any means. I just think the immediacy of radio, and I know you'll talk about the cost of it. There's two costs. There's the cost of broadcasting it. There's also the cost of producing it. And because it's relatively inexpensive now to produce a radio script, lots of people want to do it. And just because you can doesn't mean you should. So I think so I suppose it's a broader question to the media owner is they're accepting money for the space for work that they know is likely to be irritating and boring. And if everybody does that, you just train people to ignore the advertising over time. So it's a collective stuff. It's not an individual. It's like banners on the internet. It's like we are all experts at avoiding clicking on banners. I saw a statistic a couple of weeks back. It's like you're more likely to win the lottery than click on an internet banner. So by the same token, you just train people to tune out and not listen to the radio. So if you have a creative device or a hook which is familiar based on the auditory limitations of the mediums, whether that was the voice of Nelson Mandela as told through a radio at Nana's radio in 1989 or whenever it was. One of my favorite radio campaigns recently was done by Peaceful Sleep, because they understand as a brand, like the most irritating sound in the whole world, is a mosquito. And so they played with this idea of that. It's like that already you have my attention and you have my interest in what's about to happen. But then, like in the sound mixed in like the haunting voices that plague the target audience of whatever happens in your day-to-day life. So you get woken up at night, not just by mosquitoes, but you get woken up by a night by going, well, my mother-in-law doesn't really respect me. I get woken up in the middle of the night going like, do I have enough money to pay for school fees? I get woken in the middle of the night going, this colleague of mine, they want my job and they're undermining my authority in the workplace. So they took these insights, which Tsepo mentioned, and then they mixed it in like the same auditory frequency of a mosquito. And the idea being that peaceful sleep gives you a peaceful night's rest, not just from mosquitoes, but it allows all the demons inside to be settled as well, because frankly needed a break from those demons which you deal with in the day as well. So I think just that is unique, and I've just now, hopefully solved the peaceful sleep. I know we're out of mosquito season now, but that's inherently interesting and funny and persuasive at the same time. Now, you can take that script, you go, peaceful sleep, it contains and if you spray it on your ankles, you won't get bitten. And if you don't get bitten, you also won't get malaria. And peaceful sleep really is an amazing product. Go to ShopRite today. It's only $42.99. It's the same story, but it's heartwarming and it's inherently irritating, and it's interrupted the song, the Nike Reebok song that I want to actually listen to. That's why I tuned into the radio in the first place.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's such an important point, right? And I hope that having listened to a little bit of that conversation, how important it is that each of us along sort of the value chain, take responsibility for some of this along the value chain, right? From the time when it gets to you as a brand, all the way when it gets to you as the radio brand, to take some responsibility in this and to really begin to ask ourselves that question is, how do we create as effective a brand messaging as possible? There's another thing that I want to speak about when it comes to this, and this is something that I'm very intrigued about from a radio perspective. And Doug, I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Is radio has the ability to provide an incredible contextual space.
Yeah.
And hear me out, right? If you go, and I'm going to do this little experiment for a moment quickly, you're not going to be able to see it on my screen, but I'm going to click through my Instagram stories, right? And so I've got a guy that's drinking coffee, you know, because that's what we go to social media for. And then straight away, I've got a Total Sport advert selling me footwear. All right, so completely, I mean, contextually weird, right? Then click on it. I've got another guy that don't know what they're doing. I've got a pet, that's cute. I've got some milkshake, and here we go. I've now got a car brand selling me auto parts, right? So immediately as I click through this, contextually, that makes very little sense. We're going from drinking coffee to selling me auto parts, almost no context. By the way, I don't even own a car, so that doesn't work either for me, right? So this idea that it's always going to be targeted to me, well, that's not true because I don't own a car. So hear me out here. We can use the medium quite effectively then to create context because we've got humans working there. So could it be the case that when they speak about chicken, we could then go and play a Nando's ad? Could it be the case that every time we do speak about lunch, that we could go and position a Nando's ad? Can we find a way to begin to use, because it's run by humans live right now, a really contextually clever way of packaging radio that almost none of our competitors can do?
You've kind of answered your own question. So yes, you can. I mean, real-time marketing, and again, if you're going to be, you know, remotely persuasive, which is what the word like Seppo used, then you know, the more relevant you are in the moment, the higher the likelihood that that's going to be persuasive. So definitely. But the villain to that hero is radio's mass reach. So you can buy lots of it, and then it's sold at a cost per point, which means you've got a blast of an ad which didn't cost you very much to produce, going to millions of people you're training to ignore it. So that was, I think, Melissa's point as well, which is, you know, it's very easy to waste it. So when you talk about the specifics of, you know, trying to sell the world's greatest flavorful peri-peri chicken at less than 50 rand, even though everything else in the world is expensive, Nana still can feed you a brilliant meal under 50 rand. This might already add this morning. Because you got, you know, it's lunchtime now. You absolutely can do that, but you have to be aware of that and be able to respond to that uniquely. Now, there's lots of other things you can have for lunch. So the role of the brand and the brief to people like Seppo is going to be, what specifically is it around my product that is best suited to that occasion, as opposed to just trying to sell the occasion, because I can invariably sell something else, which is a lot less interesting and healthy for you, that also will cost 49.
Brilliant. I mean, Seppo, I suppose exactly what Doug was saying speaks to where you guys are from a contextual perspective, right? To try to understand the person I'm speaking to so that I can genuinely get, so not only context in conversation, but again, let's reiterate this idea of context in here, right? And how important that is to your storytelling.
Sure. So definitely right. I mean, context is everything, you know. So my storytelling obviously is influenced by what's going on in the world, what's happening, you know, and also being sensitive to what's going on out there. You know, people are quite price sensitive right now, and it's quite a thing, you know. So I remember we did it's always a battle of the chicken brands, I guess. We did a commercial for Chicken Licken. It was for the pops. So they have these chicken pops that they have, you know, and for us, we were thinking about, like, where is the world right now? People are feeling, you know, like the world is coming to an end, you know, people are bleak about the future, you know, we all right now, we're lacking motivation, you know, and we all feel like we're getting old, we're not doing too much. And the angle there was like, people feel like they're no longer popping, you know, like they're no longer popping. Life is no longer popping, you know, and we tapped into that insight around, like, how do you know when you're no longer popping? Is it when you return home at 2 a.m., you know, at 8 a.m. instead of 2 a.m., you know, what is it that makes you feel like you're no longer popping in life? But then there's one thing that will always pop, no matter how the world is feeling, and it's those chicken pops, you know. So we tapped into that insight, and we used context to actually land the idea, you know. And And like Doug was saying, I mean, Doug, I think we must brainstorm as together, because you have a creative bone in you, you know. So Doug was saying that you can deliver the message straight to people, or you can use what's happening right now in the world. You can use the experiences that people have to push your product, you know, and that's the beauty about radio and the beauty about creativity. You can use all these other things to support your creative message. You know, you might not have the best creative idea, but using the context and the relevance of what's going on in the world can just elevate that idea a bit further. And that can just make your radio ad stand out a bit more, because it gets people, it gets what people are going through.
You know what, Tepo, what's so cool about what you're saying as well is there's also somewhat of a gut feel about this thing. We didn't have to go and research and pay 17, and no offense, Mel, but pay millions and millions and millions of rands to get these insights, right? Sometimes these insights are right in front of us. Sometimes we, you know, from a creative perspective, I think it's you know, we're speaking about the sort of the inexpensive nature of that, but some people might be watching this and thinking, geez, but you know, insights are expensive, man. You know, there seems to be a bit of a feel, like a gut feel about that. We can tap into these things, right?
Definitely. I mean, one of my most favorite, because I'm quite open to listening to other brands. You know, I love creativity, and I love what we can do. So one of my favorite radio ads actually it was done by our competitor, which is KFC, and it tapped into, you know, universal insights. I mean, as a writer, I only aspire to always get those universal insights, but it was about the sad man meals. You know, and it was just about how as men. So the first round of it was just about like what makes a man. You know, the fact that I lift weights in the colored section, does it still make me a man? You know, does the fact that I can open a jar of mayo, does it still make me a man? And then the second stage with that is that the product, I think, was being discontinued, so they call them the sad man meals. And then they took like a similar approach in execution, but then the insights were still universal but slightly different. You know, it was jokes like when your mom stands up for you in a Facebook fight. You know, it's really sad, you know. And it was those lines were so sharp, and people and everybody got them, you know. And that's the beauty that comes with like using creativity and just tapping into how personal radio is. I mean, my mom has never stood up for me in a Facebook fight, but I could only imagine, you know, how sad that would be if that was to happen. So those are the kind of insights that they use just to make the medium slightly more interesting. And like you're saying, like insights are in front of us. Our experiences, you know, as much as we are different, our experiences are similar. You know, so just tapping into those things and taking each and every experience as something that you can use to communicate to people is what's genius about the medium that radio allows us to the radio that is the medium rather that is radio.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Tepo. When I was on radio, we used to have a lot of hate mail, and my mother might also have replied to some of them. So thanks, bro. I appreciate that. That's how sad it is. Okay, Dashni, I want to go to you quickly, right? Because where you guys sit from a planning perspective, let's stay here though. How important is creative and context in your world, in your life when it comes to radio from a planning perspective?
You know, I want to talk about the context part of it, and contextual has almost become synonymous with radio. And we spoke about the credibility of radio, and where we need to extend the brand's story and the brand's validity and the brand's reason to believe is in the thought leadership power of radio. Okay, we've got a 30-second ad. It lines up exactly what the product is about, and it needs to just give you, you know, more than just a teaser of what the ad and the product is. But the thought leadership power of radio needs to be utilized even more by many, many brands. That, you know, you've got radio announcers that have Twitter platforms, and it's about extending your reason to believe right through from the radio stations to interviews to the PR value of radio, all the way into the conversations that radio announcer is having, and lift those conversations. And how do you bring the product intrinsics, into that whole conversations. And I think that's where, as media agencies, we've got to, package that 30-second, that it comes formatted with that thought leadership and the power of it. And if you look at many products out there, they belong to a company, right? And what has become so powerful is, during pandemic especially, is the whole thing about sustainability and credibility of brands out there. And so many brands have actually told their stories of how they've tapped into giving back to the community. And that is actually, when you don't have a 30-second ad, that's what gives you the leverage still to stay on radio and still tell your story, but beyond just your product, because now you're not, you're achieving the love of who you are as a brand for your consumers. And I think that's where we need to play in very deliberately, okay? And, when we understand segmentation, the power of segmentation, as always equals, well, what's Doug has mentioned, the CPP and the cost, and that, we are the bean counters at the end of the day, but at the same time, you've got to give a personality and a credibility to what the numbers stand for.
Yeah, I love that. And even that last sentence, right? That's so powerful. Absolutely love that. And I think, you speak, I like in the radio circles to use the word authority. So there's a sense of authority around that. And Mel, I want to speak about this trust thing, because it's coming up more and more, right? And it seems to be something which, like, a lot of the time we speak about. What do we mean when we say it's a trusted medium? What is that like? When you look at the research, when you speak to people, Doug spoke a little bit about like fake news and all the rest of it, but what does it mean from a radio perspective that we are trusted, that we are sort of an authority?
So what's really interesting from this, firstly, when we look at the drivers to radio consumption, specifically in South Africa, we see news playing a pivotal role in the space. So a lot of people coming to radio for news because of the credibility associated with it. There's a lot of fake news out there, especially on social media, and a lot of people see this and they come to, say, a credible source like the radio, and they reaffirm that this is actually trusted, credible news. So they come here for that kind of information. Over and above that, they have a relationship with that station and that presenter. Presenters carry quite a lot of trust in this space because of the relationship and the intimacy that the actual listener has with this person. So it allows for that credibility for your brand and that brand trust that you can build. Over the past couple of years, I've seen trust becoming more and more important in this space, especially in the FSP space. We've seen that through our research, etc., where a lot of people turn to radio and go, well, can you give me longer format content and actually start to unpack this for me? Because the actual medium allows for that as well. And over and above that, we can go into other audio spaces and start to leverage those to expand on those concepts for the actual consumer or listener. So yeah, radio really lends itself to trust, and it allows for us to expand on concepts with experts that may be in the space, especially if it is a talk format, for example. And we have the opportunity to bring experts on air, and like Dashni said, and also use that space and that platform to really be a thought leader in a space. So something that we don't leverage as much and often as we should, but certainly something that we can do.
And I want to stay on this idea of personalities for a moment, because I think, again, vitally important, right? I mean, Doug, I remember hearing someone say a while back that radio personalities were like the first influencers, right? They were the first set of social media influencers. And if we think back, I mean, my parents will still speak about radio people they listened to back then. Are we still ticking the boxes? Are we still creating strong enough radio personalities? And are we still giving them the space to flourish with our brands? Do you think we're in a good space there? Do you think it's something that we have to be careful of?
Yeah, sure. It feels a little bit like, I think I know who told you that that phrase. I mean, the original influencers were probably cave painters. I don't know. Check it out, that's the guy. That's the asset I want. Bigger mammoths. Who knows? I think the role of the DJ or the radio personality is obviously critical. It's normally approached from the perspective of people don't like or respect our brand. Our brand isn't particularly influential, so we'll borrow some of the influence of people we know the public are persuaded by. And radio DJs, by the very nature of their profile and their space in popular culture, kind of inherently endorse that. I think it's a trade-off between how much influence you want to borrow. With that comes inherent risk. Nando's was we have been supporters of a number of personalities and people throughout the years. One is Gareth Cliff, for example, who from early days was a fairly interesting, well-educated, erudite individual on campus radio that then went to 702, that then went to 5FM, and eventually, certainly at scale, pioneered podcasting in South Africa, and kind of Nando's followed him all the way through. But he had an unfortunate moment during the election season last year, which then had a unfair, unwarranted backlash on Nando's, because we didn't say the things, he said it. But the general public at large doesn't understand the intricacies of a sponsorship arrangement. They don't know, you can't hold Sony accountable for the fact that Manchester United didn't make the Champions League next season. But Sony are a sponsor of Manchester United. So the same way you can't take responsibility for what Gareth said, but there's an inherent, consequence for the brand, even if it's merited or not, by being associated with influencers or influential people. So I think that's not to deter people from trying hard or taking risks. Because if you want to guarantee failure, here's how you do it. Here's the perfect recipe for failure. Like, play it safe. Aim for mediocre. No one ever got fired for being safe or making average stuff. They got fired for making brave stuff or bad stuff. And most radio advertising, whether critical or participation there, is very, very safe, which means it's guaranteed to be ignored, and then you're going to poison the medium, like we said earlier. So, I think there are inherent risks associated with, influencers, influential marketing. I think you also have to, not be bewitched by the numbers. Wow, they have so many followers on Instagram. I mean, we feed a lot of time for cricketers, for example. So when they're playing abroad and they're playing a country where Nando's is, Nando's will provide the meals for them. Take a player like Dale Steyn, one of the greatest South African fast bowlers of all time. He plays in the IPL in India. Now, he has, 3 or 4 million followers. None of them are going to see a Nando's in their whole life, because we just don't have, we have 10 restaurants in a country that has 1.2 billion people. So, you can't be lazy, just assume that, influencer equals audience size. Is it the right audience, and do they believe things that you want them to believe as well? So there is, I think, due diligence that's involved with that. And then you also have to ask yourself, what exactly do you want them to influence? And do they have kind of the right to do so? Because, does a radio DJ really want to endorse paint? Is that really the thing that they're best at? Now, maybe they can endorse, this is the role of creativity, which is, no, they don't want to endorse paint, but maybe they want to endorse the fact that their digs and dwellings are impressive and worth hosting cool parties at. And so their house wouldn't be as cool if it didn't have the kind of paint that was on the walls. So you're selling a lifestyle that's brought to you by paint, rather than these are the inherent qualities of UV protected paint.
Yeah.
I
love that. I love that. And if you are a radio presenter that is listening to this, just listen to the amount of responsibility you also have. And I think sometimes we forget about that, right? Because I think I would go so far as to say that it is irresponsible to behave in a particular manner when there is a brand involved, and it affects huge amount of people, including families, including a massive amount of that. So take some responsibility, if you are radio people, about understanding that there's a commercial imperative, and then what you say affects that brand and affects a lot of people around that. Right, that was just my soapbox for a moment. I'm getting off it, and I'm going to you, Darshni. I want to speak about the fact that radio is seen as expensive. It's seen as expensive, pretty inexpensive to write and to produce, but pretty expensive to put on the radio, especially these big commercial friends of ours, right? What do you say about this, and how can we sort of overcome this?
We need to look at, and I need to rise above the question and really just look at it more from, how do you unify the customer's journey. And that's pretty much what it is, right? And when you look at a fully integrated marketing campaign and the power at which a fully integrated marketing campaign gives you, then you are really looking at what is the ROI of that integrated campaign as opposed to the one channel or the one medium only. And that's really how this needs to be viewed, because, one can, 4 mediums can outperform the one medium. And that kind of resonance is where I think one has to look into, and the value at which that gives back to the entire marketing campaign. And, when we look at the traditional media and what traditional media costs today versus what the shiny new object of digital media, and when we overlay exactly what Doug spoke about, that when you go on to digital, it's cluttered, it's overly cluttered. And you every time you try to read an article or watch a video, you've got all of this popping up all over. And it's the right thing, it's the right place to be at the right time. However, when you weigh up all of these different aspects of clutter, of integration, it's how you use the medium to achieve what one has to achieve. And I think at the end of it all is, how are you unifying the customer's journey so you're tapping it closer and closer to the contextual power of radio, as in getting them closer to the purchasing decision.
Beautiful. I mean, is it fair to say that now radio will always form not always, bear me out, but radio has got to be combined with other things, right? It's in the mix, right? It's in the mix.
Yes. So, when I spoke about the attribution uplift that radio drives digital search, and what we, in the study that I wanted to talk about, is there was a study done for 2,100 ads over 6 different categories. And what they found is an imminent lift that every time this ad flighted on radio, there was a search activity for that brand. So that is the power of radio and how it actually influences a medium, which is the shiny new medium now, where everyone and most people, when you're looking to buy a product, you tend to start looking first through the Google search to find out exactly what this product about. And this reinforcement of the radio ad has literally just satellited and lifted the products, brought the product right forward. So, and radio plays plays very well in that integrated role. And someone also spoke about, and Doug spoke about the influencing power of radio. So those DJs and radio announcers bring that format even out of radio into conversations like social media. So I think this is how you have to look at the value of radio.
I also love it, as you've spoken about the cycle, right? And I think a lot of the time when we spoke about radio, we always spoke about radio only as a brand building exercise. We spoke about it, and I think there'll be some traditional buyers and there'll be some traditional people that'll speak of it only as building brand. That's all it does. But you've just proven to me that I now go and I now am searching off of an ad. I'm now actioning off of an ad. I'm not just building a brand, right? And I think that's an important conversation for us to have and to continue to have.
Yes, it is. And because of that relationship that radio does have. And if you look at the watershed moments we've all experienced in the way media has changed in the last, from 2020, that the whole culture of audio systems has changed in the way people have consumed media. Like podcasting has stepped forward in a big way. And you'll find now in South Africa, and I think we've reached, I think just over 88% of people that are now listening to podcasts, which is a post version, right, of live radio. So radio is still being consumed, and it's been consumed because people actually want to listen to whatever that subject matter is. And that is why we've got to leverage that whole thought leadership, because so many interviews and financial radio shows are being podcasted that consumers or listeners are listening to post that. So there's still a life and a mention of whatever the intrinsics of your product or the thought leadership of it, that is still happening thereafter. It's almost like viewing DSTV where you save the broadcast and to watch it later. So radio stepped into that too. But at the same time, I think you will always have the dimension of numbers. It's the 1 + 1 is still not equal to 2. It's still equal to 0.1. And I think that's the challenge, is when you look at it from the footprint, the geo-targeting, the comparison of the cost of a 30-second ad in morning drive time. And when that's compared to a mass channel like television, you go through that dissonance and you kind of wedge between, what do I do here? I'm challenged with this. But it's when you use radio to the power of which I've spoken to, is through podcasting, to thought leadership, and you leverage it through Twitter and the radio DJ. It's the engagement value that radio can actually enhance versus looking at it for number from a reach and frequency.
That's beautiful. And I mean, Mel, you deal with this every day of your life, right? I mean, you're in the research and space from a radio perspective. So if I have to ask you a question then, and sort of just summing up where we are right now from this space, we've only got about 5 minutes left, and I actually want to ask you 2 questions, Mel. So we're going to try to squeeze them in here. Do you think then brands are leveraging their spend with radio in the right way?
As I mentioned earlier, not always. And I think there's reasons for this. And once again, it's around going for the reach aspect, always going for that and looking at the wastage in there, and also looking at the frequency aspect and not getting it right in that space. And over and above that, not using the entire audio ecosystem. I think that was important. And then once again, not always getting the creative right. So those aspects all impact your investment at the end of the day. Are we investing the right amount of money in terms of the share of ear at the end of the day for radio? Probably not. I think there's a disproportionate amount of money going to other mediums, such as digital, that create that wastage in that space because of the fact that we're not necessarily seeing that emotional engagement and return on investment. Just because we get a lot of clicks or we're measuring something on a click-through rate doesn't mean we're actually getting engagement at the end of the day. So that's probably where my thoughts are at on that at the end of this.
Beautiful. And I would be amiss, one of our partners today, obviously the NAB, as well as Radio Always.co.za. Please go take a look at the website. Talk us through this, Mal. Let's end off with why you guys created Radio Always.co.za. What can I find on this website?
It's an amazing website, actually, Grant. So really, at the end of the day, when you're sitting in the middle of the night thinking of an idea, and as we all do as planners, strategists, marketers, researchers, etc., and we need some inspiration, all we need to do is really go to this website where we can find a whole collection of case studies. We're also going to start uploading research, and there are POVs there, etc., and thought leadership pieces where you can get your inspiration in order to understand the specific business objectives that were met by utilizing radio in the space. So we can all effectively leverage radio and get radio on our schedules and get the most effective campaigns with the best ROI at the end of the day.
I love it. So radioalways.co.za. Today, in partnership with the NAB, bringing you this Redzone webinar. So thank you so much. I want to say a massive thank you to all of our guests. It has been an honor. We can always, when there's 4 of us in this call, it always feels like we can speak for the next 4 hours, right? People might not join us for the next 4 hours, but I feel like we can speak for the next 4 hours. So I've loved it and such incredible insight. So thank you, Darshni. Thank you very much, Tshepo. Thank you very much, Doug. And thank you very much, Mel. I want to end off just by saying, right, is that it is a medium that has evolved throughout the years, and it's evolved from the time back in when the first radio signal was sent from one continent to the next in Morse code. We're now at a space where we're speaking about context, and we're speaking about podcasting. We're speaking about things that, again, have moved this medium forward, but it's a medium that will always be there. Why? Because it's a medium that's personal, and it's a medium that tells stories, and we are inherent storytellers, and we inherently fall in love with listening to stories. It'll always be there, and it's our job to continuously find ways to use it as effectively as possible. as effectively to help you sell the products that you need to sell, and also entertain and engage and uplift our society. You can see I'm a big fan of the medium, but I guarantee that the medium will always be there, maybe in different contexts, but it'll always be there. And so let's spend the time and effort and make sure that we build great radio brands, radio people, and that we use it to sell our things effectively. Once again, thank you for taking the time out for your lunch hour to join us today. It's been a privilege. And again, thank you to Dashni, thank you to Tsepo, thank you to Doug, and thank you to Melissa. We'll see you pretty soon again on one of our Redzone webinars. Have a good rest of your day. It's just gone 1 o'clock. See you soon. Bye-bye.